Hello and welcome to today's OWASP Switzerland chapter meeting. My name is Rob and I'm very happy to welcome you together with my colleagues Patrick and Sven. You can find our upcoming events on our chapter page. Are you thinking about giving something back? How about becoming a member? It has never been easier. And now, without further ado, I turn it over to you.
So this is Defect Dojo. This is the talk on Defect Dojo for OWASP Switzerland. And who's this guy? Who's this Matt guy? I like to call myself a reformed programmer. Back in the dark ages, I was originally hired to do web applications many, many years ago, cough, cough, Netscape. And now I'm an application security engineer. I've been with OWASP since 2008, so that's around 13-ish years. As part of the OWASP community, I'm a leader of the OWASP AppSec pipeline project. I'm one of the maintainers for Defect Dojo, as well as the leader of OWASP WTE, which was a web testing environment. I was on the board of OWASP, and I was an employee of OWASP, actually. So I've just been hanging around OWASP for quite some time. I've got 20 plus years of using free Libra and open source software and Linux. In fact, the last time I ran Windows for real was Windows 2000. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much I use Linux. I'm definitely a Golang fanboy. I love writing in Go. I think it's a fantastic language, and I can actually get my rather unsmall body off the ground and break boards. At least I did 2 Aprils ago when I got my second degree black belt in Tong Sudo Migu Kwan, which is a Korean martial art. Over to you, Fred.
All right, so I think I have less stuff to say than Matt. So I'm Fred. I joined the Defect Dojo project about 1.5 years ago, or maybe 2 years now. One of the core maintainers, even though I'm probably one of the poorest coder out there. I'm an ops guy at heart. I'm not really a developer. Used to play tennis. I don't have any fancy pictures to show like Matt. So I'm showing some picture of the Alps, which I crossed from Lake Geneva down to the Mediterranean Sea over last summer in like 27 days. It was a great trip. I work in product security in general, in a management position. And hopefully you guys will enjoy the presentation today.
All right, so you got to see my fun, exciting, board-breaking money shot. What you don't see behind that is the work that goes into that. And I love this picture because it shows me really tired and shagged out. This is during my testing for my DON, my second degree black belt. But this is also how I feel when I'm logging into the 15th, 16th, 102nd security tool web console, and I'm trying to combine multiple different, unfortunately, uniquely set up tool outputs, right? Because I just want to get my job done and get some results to the team so they can go off and do their thing, right? So unfortunately, that's a little harder than it has to be. And then we took a vast survey of enterprise to find out what they use for enterprise vulnerability management programs. And sadly, these are fake numbers, to be honest with you, but a surprising number of people, their vulnerability management program is Excel. And that just makes me hurt, right? Why? Why are you doing that, right? Using Excel for your vulnerability management is like putting rain boots on your dog. It just doesn't make sense, right? Why would you ever do that? So enter Defect Dojo. You may not have heard of OWASP Defect Dojo. It's an open source application, part of the OWASP projects, for vulnerability correlation and security orchestration. I like to think of it as the sort of the source of truth and the heart of a security automation program. And it takes vulnerability management and makes it much more easier and better to do because it consolidates and dedupes findings from multiple tools. You can create findings and reconcile the status with defect trackers, so you're talking to the developers in a place where they're used to working. It enables automation because of its REST API. And it maintains a list of products, or you might call them applications, and the information around them. So it also becomes a nice sort of just repository of data about the suite of applications you have.
Maybe a bit about the use cases. So of course, I guess ingest all the things is where Defect Dojo really shines also on top of automation. So I've listed a few things. that we can use Defect Dojo for. So you may use it for ad hoc uploads or manual activities, such as whenever you carry out internal security assessments, or you're having a third party, pen test your apps, or also as threat modeling is becoming more and more of a thing, to track whatever findings you actually gather when you work with your product teams on threat models. As of late, also, we've made some improvements which enable to easily map whatever SLA you may have with regards to fixing security issues that you find, and to also keep your risk acceptance right next to your findings. Of course, the other piece of leveraging Defect Dojo is you can definitely use the REST API to embed it within your CI pipelines, or whatever framework you use to make your developers' life easier. Just a word about the tech stack. So running on a tech stack that's a proven one. Python 3.7 is our base right now to accommodate for the larger number. Running on Django 2, even though we're pretty much ready to move on to Django 3. And this is all the Django love. Now, for those who know Defect Dojo, you will wonder why we still have such an old UI, right? And the UX is not all it could be. So we hope for React.js front end very soon. And there's going to be a little bit more on that later. But by any means, if there are people interested in contributing, shameless plug right here, and there will be again at the end, please come out to the Slack channel and let us know that you're master in React and would like to contribute.
All right, so we've gotten a pretty good overview of the use cases of Defect Dojo and how people are doing it. I'm going to give you the real quick elevator pitch, right? The bullet list. If I was a marketing person, perhaps I could speak to this better, but I'm certainly not that. But the things that you can do with Defect Dojo, like why would you choose it? It's really great for managing an AppSec program. It started out at Rackspace actually as what we use to manage the product security team at Rackspace. That's where it originated from 8-ish years ago. It's really nice because it'll give you the ability to create an application inventory and metadata with compliance or technology stacks and that kind of thing, particularly because you don't have to start with it full. And most of the places I've worked at had no clue how many apps they had. You can sort of iteratively do this over time. There's metrics and dashboards and reporting. We'll walk you through some of those things. It has OWASP ASVS built in. There's tagging across multiple levels. So if your unique situation at your company doesn't quite match the data model of Defect Dojo, you can use tags to sort of align those things and make them work out for you. One of the things that happened that we really didn't plan for, but was fantastic, was we got a really good historical knowledge of past assessments. Anybody who's been in a manager or a quasi-manager position inevitably gets the question from above you at the organization, when was the last time we tested app X? Well, you go to Dojo and you look at the last engagement and you have the answer. There's a calendar so you can kind of understand how full your team is. It does export to Google Sheets as well as having a REST API, so the data is not just locked into Dojo. If you can talk REST, you can pull out and munge and do whatever you need to with the data that's in Dojo. It's not a data sync. It does SSO, so Okta, SAML, Google, what have you. There's a whole bunch of notifications you can set up either at a personal or a system level for Jira, Slack, MS Teams, email, etc. And it'll ingest reports from multiple tools. So when you are using, particularly this is my case when I've done product security type work, right? At RAC, I owned everything from the servers that made the apps run to the code that ran those apps. So I kind of owned everything that it took to get that product out the door. And so we were running SaaS tools, looking at the source code, DAS tools, looking at the running application. What is it now called? SCA, software composition analysis, or third-party library tools. We were running those. We were running infrastructure tools like Nessus. We were running cloud tools. Heck, we were a cloud company. We were running container tools, right? We were running loads and loads of tools. And if you'd like to take, for say, a product and run 5, 6 tools against it to get an overall picture of it from a whole bunch of different angles, you have this fight of like, well, Nessus likes to think of a vulnerability in this way, but SAS does it that way and DAS does it that way, and you have to combine these things or manually enter them into Word or awful things like that. And so Defect Dojo supports a large number of tools.
Right, and we all know that, of course, it's a lost fight, right? We have more and more tools and more things to ingest, and today actually we're proud to announce that we reached the 100 milestone. So we are able to ingest 100 different types of reports that come out of any of these security-oriented tools. So of course, some of them have been in Dojo since the beginning, pretty much. Some of them are really new. The maturity or the support of those plugins can vary. So if you encounter one of these parser that is breaking or anything, just submit an issue, we'll correct it ASAP, or better yet, submit a quick PR to fix it. But usually fixing a parser is not such a big deal, as long as we have proper sample files to actually diagnostic what's wrong.
And so earlier I mentioned that I like to think of Defect Dojo as kind of the heart of a security automation program. I really think that's one of the ways that Defect Dojo shines, because it plays nice with so many different tools and it has a REST API. And if you've been part of a product or an AppSec team or kind of any security team, you're going to find out that there's not enough people or time, right? And AppSec teams are inevitably significantly smaller than dev teams. I've never seen it even close. I'd be shocked if it ever got close. And the idea here is to take and automate the things that don't take a human brain, so that you can have the limited supply of people on your team do the important, takes a human brain work. And Defect Dojo with its REST API can become the heart of that AppSec automation program and give you some significant advantages. So here's an example of the AppSec pipeline template, and Aaron Weaver, the co-lead with me, and I kind of sat down several years ago and said, what are the major functions that happen for kind of any security program? For us, it was AppSec, but this really applies generally, right? So you have intake at the left. That's where you're getting work coming into your life. This could be regulations saying you have to test every so often. This could be a VP saying, hey, I want you to look at this app. This could be an acquisition. This could just be an ad hoc thing. It could be any number of things, but you have work coming in, and we call that intake. The second is triage. So at triage, I've got this work now that's come into my group. We need to understand how rigorously it needs to be tested, right? And depending on the testing types we're going to do, hopefully there's automation to run one or more of those tests. But that's the triage phase, where I have this work and now I decide, is it going to get SAST and SCA, or is it going to just get SAST, or what's going to happen? And then in this third phase is the testing phase. This is where I'm going to run one or more tools, take that output and put it all into a vulnerability repository, right? Which would be cough, cough, Defect Dojo, right? That would be what I would recommend. And then from there, if there's several key things you can do with that vulnerability repository, right? I can push defects off to a defect tracker like Jira, like I mentioned earlier, so that developers have it in their normal sort of place. I particularly like to do reporting and metrics right out of the Defect Dojo API, because then I can tweak them to fit what my business really cares about. You can wire them into GRC tools. And then another interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't catch about a tool like Defect Dojo is, if I'm unable to filter out false positives or other issues that I don't want to address in the profiles of the tools in the testing phase, I can go into Defect Dojo and mark those as false positive, or suppress them, or merge them, or do whatever I need to make them in a much more consumable fashion to the developers downstream, which is having that sort of rest place where vulnerabilities sit, and as an AppSec professional, I can go in and arrange them in such a way that they make the most sense for my business is really, really useful, versus just handing somebody that 200-page PDF because you ran Fortify, right? That's no good. And so the first time I did a AppSec pipeline, this was at Pearson. It's a large publisher. And this is how we did those phases. So intake was handled by an application we created called Bag of Holding. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't have done Bag of Holding, except for Defect Dojo didn't have as many features as it did at the time. And having two apps means that I have to synchronize the app data in Defect Dojo with the app data in Bag of Holding. That we bought ourselves some problems with this design, so maybe I wouldn't recommend following this exactly. For orchestration, we use StackStorm. That was another first-time round mistake. StackStorm is a fantastic piece of software, but it has like 87 features, and we probably used 4 of them. So we way over bought technology. It was cool, but we got way more than we needed, to be honest with you. You can do orchestration very simply. Even things like GitLab's runners will do it for you. You don't need to get fancy here. And then we had a whole bunch of tools that were automated. Checkmarks and Veracode for SAST. We had Burp Suite, Zap running containerized. We had White Hat. We had IBM AppScan, and then Qualys. Funny enough, Qualys wasn't even our tool. Another team had purchased it. We heard about it. We wrote integration to suck it into Defect Dojo because all that did is give us even more visibility into what was running out in the world, right? Or our company's world anyway. Everything went into Defect Dojo. We could do that false positive management there. We did push issues out to Jira. We did push issues to GRC for the risk tracking. And then we did metrics right out of the REST API. That was our first sort of generation of AppSec pipeline. Here's another example of one that's a little more event-driven, where when a developer checks in code on the left, it went to stash. That would send out a webhook that would hit an AppSec pipeline. That would fire off a whole bunch of Dockers that would run one or more tools against that target. The results of those tools would flow into Defect Dojo. A Slack message would be dropped with the summary of the findings from Defect Dojo, as well as pushing those issues into Jira. And then here's an example of a proof of concept piece of code I have open sourced up on GitHub, where I wanted to understand. I ended up implementing this for real at Duo Security, but I wanted to understand how I could containerize a whole bunch of tools and then run them at arbitrary targets and push all those results back and into Defect Dojo. So the idea here was you started with some sort of event that let the pipeline know, hey, there's work to do. It would launch a bunch of containers at a bunch of different targets. Those targets could either be repos or running applications. Those results would then be filtered through the AppSec pipeline back into Defect Dojo, and off you go. And let me do a quick demo here. So I'm in this one particular directory. I've got a command to run gasp docker. That's my project, the gasp docker binary. It generates some logs and then a spec, and I'll explain those in a minute. So let's look at that spec directory. So there's 2 YAML files on there, a master YAML and a sec pipeline config.yaml. So let's look at that master YAML. So here we've got, let me jump up to the top here. Here we've got that master YAML. It describes different named pipelines. So there's a source code pipeline here that does the startup functions first, right? We'll run these, and then it will do the actual pipeline work. And then when it's done, it'll do this final stage. So it's a sort of a 3-stage pipeline where I can have multiple tools happen inside of each stage. Now for this demo, we're going to go down to the GASP demo pipeline, where we're going to do a git clone. We're going to run bandit against some source code, and we're going to push those results into Defect Dojo. So let's look at that sec pipeline config real quick. Jump to the top. This one describes all of the tools and containers that are available to GASP. So this provides the tool name, some metadata about the tool, its actual Docker, some just links for more information, and then more interesting parameters. These are the parameters that Bandit needs. It needs LOC, which is the location of the source code. And then the command section says, this is how you run this tool. These are basically optional arguments you can send to the command. It works for Python. And there's 2 different profiles. These are ways to run the tool. right? All just recursively looks at the source code directory and finds all the things it can find. And then there's a tuned one that has a much more narrow focus. And there are different ones of these. Like here's the one for Defect Dojo. This basically creates engagements on the fly for us, as well as the Git version, right? That'll do clones and such of a branch or a tag or those kind of things. So here's that command just to show everybody. I'm going to time it. I've got Gasp Docker. The P is just the pipeline that I'm running. Remember Gasp demo. The A is just the name for that. So this is a Switzerland demo. I'm cloning from this purposefully out of date and broken repo. The source code will be located there in the containers. Here's my stuff to talk to Defect Dojo, and it happens to be for product ID 2, which, by the way, if I jump over here to Defect Dojo, really quick tour of Defect Dojo. Here is the main UI. You can look at all the product types. That's sort of the base element, right? Products belong to a product type. We happen to have a Switzerland demo product type. And inside of the Switzerland demo product type, we've got an automated app and a not automated app, very cleverly named. You can see this app has had an engagement. There's 55 active findings. We don't have any engagements for this one. And this happens to be product ID 2, right? So that's the one I'm going to use for this automation, product ID 2, right here. Oh, and just to prove that there's no hidden things behind the scenes, here's my binary from Go, right? I'm not doing any kind of funny business. So I'm going to go run that command. I have verbose output turned on, so we're going to have a bunch of stuff to screen so we don't have to wait. But in this first section, we're actually doing a git clone from GitHub down onto my computer. Oh, that's done. Now it is running Bandit against the container to look at the source code and see if there are any issues in outputting that to a JSON file. And once it's done poking through the source code of Defect Dojo, it's going to launch the source code of Defect Dojo. Ironically, it's going to launch the Defect Dojo container and push those results into a new engagement that it auto closes. And that took a whole 37 seconds. And if you pop over here, and if we view engagements, we will see there is now a closed engagement where there wasn't one. And I can drill into that engagement. Here's my Bandit scan with the 147 findings. I can drill into that and I can go through these findings and I can look at hard-coded bind all interfaces. And it'll give me information on that finding. So this is the kind of interesting security automation work you can do with Defect Dojo. So the event-based one that I showed you with Stash, these are numbers from that particular pipeline. They had 15 different repos they were dealing with, and over 4 months, they ran 5,100 runs of the pipeline, which was over 25,000 container executions, right? So it took a little while to get there, and it takes a while to make this automation happen. But once you're done with that work, it's so easy to just fire off these tools. Right? It becomes kind of a non-event to run a tool. And then these are numbers from when I was working at Pearson. In 2014, when I was hired, it was late in 2014, we had 44 assessments that we'd done that year. In 2015, we started building the AppSec pipeline. We got it done around March. And we lost that middle column, or that middle row rather, is the head count. And we lost 3 people on our team, 3.5. There's a halftime person we lost. We lost 3.5 people, but we actually increased to 224 assessments. And then in 2016, after having the pipeline running for a full year, we did 414 assessments and lost a further 2 people. So we almost 10x'd our throughput while losing people, which tells you the power of doing this automation and making those tests have a lot less friction.
All right, so we'll talk now a bit about the deployment options, which have evolved over time, obviously. So we have a first way to deploy Defect Dojo, which has probably become the de facto way to at least try it, if not to run it in some semi-production environment. It should be as easy as doing a Docker Compose pull and Docker Compose up to run either the latest release of the master branch or the latest development branch. Both of them should work at any time. Of course, we can reserve the right to break dev from time to time, but usually it works at all times. You can easily override profiles whenever you've cloned the code. So if you want, for example, to do development and you want to put breakpoints in the code for that new parser that you're developing, then there's a PTVSD profile that just does that. You should head over to documentation for more details. And this is certainly the most reliable way to run it right now, simply because all our unit tests and integration tests actually leverage Docker. If you look at any of our PRs, you will see that we have probably 22 test suites now running against each PR, which are giving us enough confidence that we're not breaking anything when we develop our refactor things. So Docker Compose is one piece of it, and maybe a real-world example, which I used to run at my employer. We started running production Defect Dojo on AWS in a very non-DevOpsy fashion. So it ran on one EC2 instance, T2 large, nothing fancy in there. We just took off the database to RDS. I can't remember the size, but it was just kind of the standard RDS deployment profile. Tweaked a little bit the UWSGI settings, the salary settings also, and we were good to process to about 200,000 findings. Of course, I work for CloudBees, so we do quite a bit of CI, and we have a huge database of findings. The blocking thing became Celery at some point, so even with the tweaks with one container only for Celery, we would end up crashing the deduplication process just because it's so time consuming. So whenever you hit those numbers of findings, then it becomes, you need to move on to something else. Or I don't know, take a very much larger EC2 instance or something. But I would advise them to probably move to Kubernetes, which I did. So we do now for a few months now, and fairly reliably, I guess, deliver a hand package to deploy Defect Dojo. So package with hand 3. You can easily try it with Minikube, probably with K8S or K3S also, and any other flavors that can run on your desktop. But we've only tried, or at least I've only tried with Minikube so far, and it works well. You can take that also and run it on your favorite cloud provider. Of course, you would have to make some subtle changes so that it fits your context there, but it does work. And the one caveat right now that we are supposed to be working on is there is no support for file uploads. So if you want to upload evidence, screenshots, or threat models, today it's not possible unless you come up with your own, persistent storage for your own cloud provider. Then maybe that could work. But out of the box today, it doesn't support it. So stay tuned. Hopefully sometime will free itself up over the next month, and that support should come in. So another real example on Kubernetes, which is my own example. So running Defect Dojo production on a GKE cluster with 5 nodes. Basically to allow for high availability, because the teams have come to rely on Defect Dojo quite a bit. And we need the way to have Defect Dojo always available as any true production application. Seamless upgrades, of course, are being facilitated by Kubernetes and GKE, and it does work. I'm not scared to upgrade production in the middle of the day, and the only thing that is basically going to show a possible downtime is whenever The Django migrations run, so you should still account for maybe a couple of minutes of downtime, unless Valentine, one of our core maintainers, pull some crazy PRs and have a massive Django migration. But it doesn't happen all the time. So it happened once though. So do that on the weekend. Always be careful. The database, of course, is running outside. It's in this case Cloud SQL. And the same Defect Dojo settings are being applied, and these settings are the ones you can find in our documentation. So 24 concurrent connections, nothing fancy, and Tesauro in pre-fork mode to kind of handle the stuff. Now, the value add also of running Kubernetes is instead of scaling processes within the container, you can just scale the pods themselves. So whenever there's a surge or I need to run deduplication over 1.5 million findings in our instance, well, I can just scale up the number of server workers and it's going to get the job done. And at the bottom of that slide, the actual numbers taken from a few days ago, and it's running well, actually very easily. So we could actually charge it a little more that you wouldn't notice probably. So real convincing Kubernetes example in production, really nice.
If you're not as brave or don't have as many skilled Kubernetes people around, and you want to do kind of an old school way to install Defect Dojo, I had the pleasure, maybe displeasure, of creating the first, the second, and now the third installer for Defect Dojo. I wrote the first two in Bash because I don't like myself. And I wrote the third one in Go because I find that to be a much better language than Bash for sure. And the idea with GoDojo was to create a single binary that all you have to do is download GoDojo. There's GoDojo, it'll automatically create a config file for you. You edit that config and it knows how to reach out to GitHub and pull down the sources for you and do all the work to set up running Defect Dojo. It has over 160 configurable options. They all have same defaults, so really all you have to do is choose the version you want and the admin password for the initial admin user, and the rest of the defaults should just work. I mean, if you want to tweak stuff, you're certainly welcome to. All of those defaults, if they're not in the YAML, can be overridden with environmental variables. It's not an interactive installer. It's driven by the configuration. I've not written the thing that prompts you. The initial or the setup bash, the one we EOL, used to prompt you, but honestly, doing a configuration file I think is easier. There's multiple logging levels, which I couldn't get easily with Bash. So you can actually turn on trace logging if it does break, and you can figure out why it breaks, which is handy. And it can install either a numbered release, a specific commit, or the head of a specific branch. So particularly for testing and dev work and PR stuff, this is also nice just to be able to pull down stuff and do an install. That's more for a much more traditional like VM type of installation. Over to you.
Thanks, Matt. So maybe going over some recent improvements and what could be coming next. So there's been a lot of efforts as of late to refactor big pieces of Defect Dojo to make it more efficient, but also more reliable, and remove code that would be duplicated, for example, but also to make it easier for contributors to find the information in the logical place instead of having to hunt down code in various places. So a lot of work has been done, and hats off to Valentine and Damien, especially, not to forget Pascal, of course, and some other moderators of Defect Dojo that have been hard at work to do that refactoring. And along with that, the tests that give us the confidence now, more than ever, that Defect Dojo is stable across code changes. We've also improved release governance. So for the people that have been watching Defect Dojo over maybe the past couple of years or 3 years, or maybe since the beginning, who knows? You'll notice that for a while now we've been releasing every month, which was not the case before. We have we release every month, and we release patch release whenever something comes up, either a security release or a major bug fix that needs to make it in ASAP. Re-import, which is also a major feature of Defect Dojo, has been refactored also. The value of reimport has actually increased a lot, because you will see, and I don't think I have it in my demo, but maybe we can try something quick afterwards. You will see exactly what made it in, what got closed in between reimports. So if you scan your master branch, for example, in the CI pipeline, and as time goes by, then reimport will kick in, and you will see exactly what changed, and you will get the easy link to see exactly what findings were closed, which ones were opened. So giving it a lot more value. Also, a very late improvement, probably last week, I think, is the grouping of findings within Defect Dojo, so that if you get findings that really look alike, right, and you don't want to create 20 Jira tickets for your team, then you can decide to group those findings and create only one Jira ticket for your team. Still an experimental feature, so we welcome feedback on there, but it's been working fairly well for me so far. Performance improvements always trickling in, ever faster, I would say. I've run deduplication on 1.2 million findings this afternoon. Actually hit a little something that crashed my RabbitMQ, but I have probably a fix on the way, or at least a configuration tweak on the way for you if you ever happen to run such large databases. But everything is running faster for quite some time, thanks to all the aforementioned improvements too. And maybe a data point, it's been several months that we pretty much merge over 100 PRs a month. Of course, there are some dependable PRs being merged, but also a lot of PRs from contributors, moderators alike. So let's keep up the good job. Up next, so we have a new authorization model coming through, and that's thanks to Stefan, an outside contributor with whom we've been working a little bit closer those past couple of months, and he's decided to deep dive into Defect Dojo and rework the authorization model, which was very much needed. So it is pretty much ready for testing, I think. Maybe one last PR to make it basically feature complete. But hidden behind the feature flag, you can test that new authorization model. It's going to be much more flexible and hopefully allow for better RBAC for companies that need it. Up next also, for the people following on the API front, we've deprecated and end-of-lifed API v1. So v2 is now the only active API for which we will do bug fixes or enhancements. We need to give it more love. It is functional. I mean, that's probably the one thing to say, right? It's working well, but the swagger sometimes for the types is not exactly right, and it could be made better. I mean, that's everything. So API is set to be getting some love over the next 3 months, let's say. So hopefully we'll deliver incremental improvements there. There is also, and as many people complain about it, about the UI. So yeah, Defect Dojo is probably not the most intuitive tool out there. It does get the job done, but if you want to put it into developers' hands and not only security nerds, then maybe you have a little issue. So we have GSOC this year. So Damien and myself will be mentoring students that will work on React.js. So the aim of the GSOC will be to bring about at least a partial revamp of Defect Dojo using React.js and maybe Material UI, depending on how we set the course for GSOC. But in any way, I think we all agree that the UI needs a revamp. So again, shameless plug for our project. As I said in the beginning, if you do have React.js skills, we need you guys, or girls, right? I'm not being sexist by saying guys. I'm just not an English speaker, I guess. But yeah, React.js, if you have that, please come to us. We welcome you, definitely. Also on the helm front, starting with the next version, and that's also an outside contribution, you will be able to search for Defect Dojo we will have the Helm chart readily available for you. Oh, live demo time. All right, and this time it's me. All right, so this is on my own laptop. This is running tip of the branch on dev. Matt already presented you the bulk of the interface. So I have one engagement in there, which is basically an auto-generated one. And within that engagement, we have 4 tests. All right. I'm going to hide that. It's a small screen. I hope everybody sees okay. I have 4 Anchor engine scans to run out of the sample files that we have. This is the 1 and 20 findings test. And the 2 others were done on the Defect Dojo Django image 1.13.0 and the next one on the 1.14.0. So just looking at that, you can see that the 1.13 image had a total of 190 findings. Of course, at that point, nothing is getting duplicated. I haven't touched it. I haven't looked at the results. And then on the next import, so it's not a re-import, this is actually a new import on the new Docker tag 1.14.0. We have a total findings of 181, so 9 kind of got away. And we have 164 duplicate findings, meaning that between the 2 scans, 164 findings are actually the same one. So as you look through your through the test and as you scan things, you don't need to always look at the same things. You can basically address the original findings, and all the duplicates you could basically kind of ignore. That could be one way of doing it. So everything happens behind the scenes. Technically speaking, this is an asynchronous process that's handled by Celery. The queue is handled by default by RabbitMQ. We were also talking about moving that over to Redis, but that's not done yet. You could mark duplicates. Actually, let's go see a duplicate. I think I wanted to show you how a duplicate looks like. Let's take either one. And let's take a look at the anatomy of what a duplicate finding looks like. So at the top, of course, you have the main information about the finding. Depending on the parser that you would be using, more or less of this information would be present. Then you have a duplicate cluster. So in this case, we have only one duplicate to this original finding. So the original finding is number 74, and the duplicate finding is the one we're looking at, and you can see this over here to kind of simplify the view, and this is it. So you have in one place, you actually have the information. If you decide, or if for some whatever reason you want to reset that status, or reverse the relationship between the original finding and the duplicate finding, you could do it right there too. There's also a similar findings pane where it was found that other findings really looked alike to that original finding, but not quite. So depending on the duplication algorithm, which you can actually specify per tool. So Anchor actually is one of them. The deduplication algorithm will look at specific fields to work it out. And if I recall correctly, it's going to look at severity, it's going to look at CVE, it's going to look at component name, location, component version, all those files, and decide based on these values whether or not it's a duplicate. So this means this similar have something missing, right? It could be that one of these fields is off, which is most likely the case. So looking at a glance, we can see the original, the title is lib mariadb 3 blah blah blah, and the others are MariaDB client, right? So it's not exactly the same, but they do look awfully familiar. We can see the version is the same, and if we are to dig deeper into those similar findings, we could probably realize that you know, the package group to which they belong is the same, and maybe we decide to group them together, which you could probably do. At least now you could. So this is, in a nutshell, a bit about deduplication. One thing worth mentioning is if you decide for your own context that deduplication doesn't work as well as it should, and you decide to change, okay, I want to get rid of that field for the duplication to compute the hash code, or you want to add another one, then you can rerun the deduplication manually. You don't need to wonder how it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. You can trigger that on your own schedule. All right, and trying to keep it on track. So I wanted also to show how we could group findings so that we can make sense of all those things that look similar and maybe push it to Jira. At the same time, we'll be demoing a little bit of the Jira push and how we can keep in sync the Defect Dojo finding status and the Jira issue status. So we were looking at those MariaDB kind of similar findings. So we could select them and say, well, all of these, I want to group them together, right? And you can bulk edit here and click on the group, rightly so marked as experimental. And we want to create a new group. Just give it a name, submit it. And we just successfully created a finding group with 4 findings inside. There's a new pane that's over here, group 1. One group kind of gives you the high-level overview of what's in there. Of course, if I click here, and this is to shame Valentine, I'm so bad. Yes, not implemented yet. Come on, Valentine, you need to do an effort there. That was just a joke. Valentine is working amazingly well. All right, so and now, of course, we want to tell, we don't tell the product team that they need to bump up that version. So product team is not going to look at Defect Dojo necessarily, but we want to push that across to where they look. Maybe they look in Jira. So the only thing we have to do is push that little arrow here. What I didn't mention is that my product in Defect Dojo is set up already for Jira. So of course, you'd have to go through that setup. And we can see that I have now a Jira issue that's linked to this. So let's go take a look. And it works. I'm amazed. All right, so this is that brand new Jira issue for your team to work on. Everything got nicely put into a table with all the details. Worth mentioning also that if you do not want details to actually show in Jira because you have some confidentiality to respect, because your Jira is open to your whole company and you want to make sure that nothing gets prematurely disclosed, you can change the Jira template. You can actually tell Defect Dojo to use a certain template, one maybe with full details and one with no details, hereby forcing people to actually log into Defect Dojo to see the security vulnerability itself. So in this case, this is full details. We push everything to the team, blah, blah, blah. All right. So now the team's done, right? So that ticket is going to be marked done. I have a little webhook configured in Jira, which is here. So I have an ngrok running on my local computer to temporarily expose my local, and it just got the webhook. Man, this is really going to work until the end. And so now, if I do refresh, yes, we don't have React.js yet, so we have to refresh the page. It's coming soon, it's coming soon. The status is now mitigated because the Jira basically got closed. So this is all working really well. And one of the recent additions that we've made over the past month is you can run like a daily reconciliation job also as a cron job, or a salary beat cron job where you can decide if the algorithm can be clever enough and reconcile based, for example, on the last updated Defect Dojo finding or Jira issue, or if Jira is your source of truth, then the reconciliation can always take the Jira status and sync up the Defect Dojo findings to which there are Jira links. And this also works quite well. So a bit on community, because we would be nothing without our community. So I wanted to first give a brief shout out to the core team.
It has been a super active project, probably for the last, 2 years or so. It's really picked up. And this is not coincidentally around when Fred and Valentine started showing up and really getting into the project, which was fantastic. We mentioned Google Summer of Code. This will be the third time that we've had a Google Summer of Code sponsorship. If it all works out for this year, 2021 is not quite set in stone yet, but we have 2 really strong candidates that we're looking forward to. And it's been a couple of years that we were tagged as a OWASP flagship project. So it's a mature project. It's been around for a long time, and I think the reason why we have these many stars, I can remember when Greg and I were like, hey, cool, we got 70 stars. Now we have 1,600 plus. Like, it's kind of nuts. I mean, it's been a long time, but it's been fantastic. And I think one of the reasons that made this project be as popular as it is, even with its not so stellar UI, is the fact that it was written by people doing the work. Right, the people who've been writing and contributing to Dojo are people that are in AppSec teams and are doing this work. And so it's really designed to make your life better from the point of view of somebody who's already doing similar work. And I think that's why we have this large number of contributors, 31 authors, right? 12 commits. And I don't think we would have even been close to this kind of level of contribution if we hadn't been focused on helping the end user.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, we are always looking for more contributors, more help for pretty much anything. It can range from writing code, parsers, refactoring if you've got the skills, front end, obviously, again. But documentation alike, I mean, documentation also speaks a lot for the project. So there's also some work we recently switched over from read the docs to GitHub pages, and we still have a little bit of work to do there. But even providing example of scanners output, if you happen to run a newer scanner and the parser is not working anymore, please try to submit a redacted scan. I mean, we don't ask you to divulge all your secrets and all your endpoints, URLs, and stuff like that. But if you can provide such output, it's great for us. Join us even just to chat on Slack. I mean, the interaction usually leads to new ideas or bug fixes even, because of course most people using Slack also is because something's not working. But it always gives us idea, and having the energy from outside people is really great to have. So please jump on there. The donate sponsor feature enhancement is a bit on hold. So if you were thinking, yeah, I'm gonna get $50,000 to Matt and Fred so that they can run ahead with Defect Dojo, well, today it's not really possible. I think we're discussing now on how we could accept sponsorship more officially. It's still in the works. So whenever this is settled, we will, of course, put the necessary information in for the community to read.
Yeah, we're trying to find an appropriate, transparent way to show what happens with those sponsorship funds, and that's just been a bit of work. Greg's been working hard on that, but we're close. We're just not quite there.
Yep. And maybe some highlights about contributors and not us moderators that have been contributing, big things, or maybe even small things. But of course, I cannot list everything. If you're interested in more details, please look at the release notes. But so I think, yeah, Stefan did a great job with the new authorization model. It's going to move us forward on the RBAC stuff, like a great deal. Recent performance improvements by Daniel. recent contributor as well, if I remember correctly. Some GitHub Actions and Kubernetes related work by Tesauro, and I don't necessarily, I know the handles, but I'm not close friends to all those guys, right? But good job, guys, there. Bunch of new importers and parsers by contributors too, which allowed us to accept more and more and ingest more and more. And I don't know about the competition, but I don't think anyone, even commercial software, can ingest 100 type of outputs. So I think we're pretty much the only one out there. And API enhancements by Romain, two guys I actually personally know because they are here in Switzerland around the API. And guys, if you listen to this, please come back. The API needs more love, so you can do more.
Yes, and then if you want to get your hands dirty and play around with Defect Dojo, we used to have an instance up in Heroku. If you see an old Heroku link, it will not work. The new one is at demo.defectdojo.org. That's running the latest release, plus or minus a day or two, because I haven't automated the updating of it quite yet. So maybe it might take me a day to get it done, depending on time zones. But I try to do that within 24 hours of when we do the last release or a point update. But you can log in. It's a running Defect Dojo. You can log in as an admin. You can poke around and see all the features. Understand this is obviously a public demo that anybody can log into. I wouldn't put sensitive stuff in there. And then every night it gets wiped and reinstalled. So that they don't expect your data to live there as well. It'll only stay there for 24 hours. And then, of course, like Fred mentioned, you can always just clone the repo and do a docker compose up-d, and boom, you've got a running compose. But if you just want to, like, I've used the demo tons. I'm biased a little bit because I set it up, mind you, but I've used the demo tons for things like, hey, I want to test something out against the API that I wrote. I don't want to run it against my real version. Let me just see if it works against the demo, and or I want to show somebody a feature that's upcoming because we're maybe a version back at my day job. Those kind of things can all happen. Or if you just want to see if Dojo would work for you, that's a great place to go and check it out.
Cool. I just thought of something that we didn't put in the slides, but we also have a HackerOne program. So if you find security issues with Defect Dojo itself, please disclose responsibly and look for our Defect Dojo HackerOne program. Unfortunately, we're not able to give out, reward or swags, but you have our greatest gratitude.
Thanks a lot for the very cool introduction and explanation. And the first thing I actually want to start with, and that's related also to a talk we had last time about OWASP SAP, and there we had the issue discussed that findings OWASP SAP generates kind of they can't be marked as false positives. And the next scan, you'll have again all your findings and have all the work again. Now, you mentioned that you have the ability to mark something as a false positive, and you have also DDoP implemented. Would this be an option to use your tool Defect Dojo actually together with OWASP SAP and make sure that I have to only mark or investigate and analyze a finding once?
Yeah, you want to go first, Fred, or I can talk to it?
Either way.
Well, I'll talk about my experience, and then Fred contradict me if you're doing something differently, because there's like 15 ways to do things in Defect Dojo, which is good and bad. The way I've handled that in the past is there's an option called false positive history, where if for a scan one with SAP, I mark something as a false positive. Oh, he's giving me the, yeah, he doesn't like false positive history. That's why I wanted us to both answer this. I've historically used false positive history to where I can mark things as a false positive, and then the next time that same issue comes in from the same scanner, it will also be marked a false positive. And so you could get around it that way. Fred has a different way he works with it, which is nice because that's what Defect Dojo will let you do. But go ahead, Fred.
Yeah,
how do you handle that?
So I don't use the false positive history feature, which is kind of a bit of an overlap of the dedupe function, itself. But yeah, feel free to use either one, right? So I don't use Zap either, but I guess this is actually a question that can apply to any parser. I don't think, or maybe I recall wrong, but I don't think Zap has a dedicated dedupe setting in the default configuration. So maybe it's using the default deduplication algo, which could be kind of weird. So my advice would be to ensure that Zap has the proper deduplication algo applied to it. Of course, the first scan is gonna yield all those potential false positives. So that first work will have to be done nevertheless. But if the dedupe is set properly, this means that everything that comes next and all those same things that comes next will be matched to the duplicate and to the first original rather, and marked as a duplicate, and the original being marked as false positive. There you go. You won't have to look at that anymore. So it could be.
I think we're seeing a difference in the history of using Defect Dojo, because I started using it prior to the fancier dedupe that's come about in the last year or two. I can't remember when that came in. And so for my mind, I'm used to the older dedupe style, which was effective but a little bit blunt. And the false positive was kind of a special case to use that. Both work though, and that both are perfectly fine. And I think Fred's probably right. The better way to do that is probably to use the dedupe with the picking the right attributes for the algorithm. Is probably a better way to do that, but in the simple case, the false positive history does work.
Very nice. Thanks a lot. I think that answers a lot of questions from people out there.
If you would like to work directly on Defect Dojo, let's assume that, for your security champions, for your ISOs, for your system architects, whatever, would it be possible to generate individual views for those groups? So you want to hide certain things, right? Not everyone should see everything. And then if that's possible, that's the first part. Then the second part would be, if so, would it be possible to hide certain findings, even though they would belong to a given product? But you know already as a security engineer, it's not going to happen.
So it's a good question. So today, no, it's not possible. It may be possible with the new authorization model, depending on where Stefan pushes it. But given the way it's implemented, I think this is something that could be possible. So something to probably help us test and see if it could answer your questions, I would say, because it's still very much experimental, hidden behind the feature flag. Right now, the only thing you could do is hide a product entirely, right? So once you are within the product, then I think the only other thing you can restrict is whether you're able to edit or not. So basically read only, read write. But with the current authorization model, this is all there is. So have to wait for the new framework to come in.
So either you can see everything of a product or none.
Pretty much, yes.
Right. Yeah. One thing I've done to work around that limitation of the authorization model in Defect Dojo, and this is a bit of a hack, but I'm a hacker, so hey, what the heck? I've written code against the API to read in, say, a finding with a particular tag or a particular just finding ID and move it manually from one product to another, right? Like close it out in the product A and open it in product B. And it's a kludgy thing, but it works, right? And I've had also tools to do similar things where there was, I forget what tool it was. We had one of those software composition analysis tools. I think it was Black Duck. I don't remember the exact vendor, but I hated the way that their findings imported just because of how they broke up the language. And I was doing reporting out of the API, so I wanted the finding block to look nice so my report looked nice. I just wrote a tool that would loop through in the API all of the findings that came in for Black Duck and rewrite them in a way that looked nice so that when I auto-gen a report, that looked nice too. So in some of these not weird, but atypical use cases or ones that are really specific for your business, the API for me has been a godsend, right? Because I can always just do things like I would do in the UI just with the program and get around those limitations or the lack of features in Dojo.
You could use labels. You can use labels in anything in Defect Dojo. So, and of course, you can query those through the API. So if you say certain findings should not be visible, you could just tag them as such, and then with a small API, call or whatever, then you could just basically skip over them and just present what you want to whoever.
All right.
Yeah, the tags can be really powerful for those kind of micro, or very company specific customizations.
Cool.
Which is quite a nice passover to what you can actually do with Defect Dojo. And as said, I have a few questions in that area. One is from Oleg, actually, who asks, does Defect Dojo support spot box report XMLs, for example, for FindSec box extensions?
That's a good question. Let me find out right now.
Well, while Fred's looking, I'll dance a little. I don't remember if that's one of the. Is it or not, Fred?
Yeah, it's in there. I don't know if it's the XML one. Because if the tool supports several versions or like a JSON output and a XML output, for example, then most often somebody wrote the parser for only one of the two, for example. So let me just open up the code. You can talk while I search, man.
Yeah. So what are the if it doesn't support it, the easy way to get it supported, if let's say it does JSON and you're giving XML, or I can't remember which way it worked. We do have a repo called sample files under the Dojo org and GitHub, and you can upload a redacted, or I like to do things like just scan the source code for a WebGoat or something that is super public, right? Do that kind of work and then provide those results as a sample scan and put in a bug and say, hey, like I'd like to handle this other format. If you're not, a Python programmer, certainly getting those sample files is, we kind of have to have those before we can write a parser. You kind of got to know what you're parsing before you can actually parse it and not just guess at the structure.
So it does support the XML one. So the description is nice. XML report of the text UI CLI. That's what it said. Never tried it.
Nice, yeah. We're getting way beyond my memory of importers anymore with the 100.
Very nice, very nice. Thanks a lot. When it comes to other features, is it possible to bind the users to Active Directory groups and existing role groups? So kind of to have nice integration with existing Active Directory.
So yes and no. The way I've done AD was through an SSO, if I remember correctly. Oh shoot, I forget which SSO provider it was. I think it was Okta. It may have been a different one. It may have been the Oracle's SSO provider, but it was a SAML endpoint. That the SAML endpoint relied on AD groups. So there was a mapping between an AD group and a SAML group, right? So I would add them to the AD, I can use Dojo group, right? And then they could log in. And then we were setting up SAML integration with Defect Dojo. You can set a default role that the users come in as. It does not currently honor SAML groups, but you can drop them into the current authorization model is sort of a 3-level. You can be an active user, which basically just says you can log in. You can't really see anything. You can be a staff, which means you can do pretty much anything across the products unless you turn on product authorization. And then an admin, which means you can do all the things, including user administration. And so what a lot of people will do, and what I've done in the past, is map that AD group person to the active user. That way they come in as a read-only, although read-only, they come in till they log in and can't see anything, right? But they are now in Dojo. And then I, as the admin of Dojo, go into the UI and say, okay, John just logged in. He's in the user table. Now I can make him a staff user and give him only access to these 3 products. And so it's a combination of automated and manual. You can take people's access in and out of Dojo at the AD group level, but the products they see inside of Dojo is still inside of Dojo currently. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. You mean there's no function to map AD groups to Dojo groups, actually?
Correct. I have seen one person do a SAML integration at the product type level. So if your product type, so the data model in Dojo is product types have products that you do engagements with and etc. And so if you divided up your products into your Android products and your iOS products and your web products, you could assign a SAML user to drop into just the Android or one product type only if you want to do that. So it's not what people really want for grouping, but that's kind of the best we can get at a Dojo's authorization model, which is why we're super happy about what Stefan has done with revamping authorization. Because originally Dojo was written for our team. And if you roll back 6-7 years, we had notes on a lot of the different, you'll see there are notes you can add to a lot of the different places. We very much used it as an internal tool. So you might say, I really hate product team X, they're such jerks in the notes, or watch out for so-and-so, he's a real pain in the wazoo. And then we were asked, hey, can we open up Dojo to the other people? And we thought, sure, we have to make some code changes, and we radically hit all the notes. So that's the history of Dojo, though. When it was originally created, it was really only for the product team to use, product security team to use. And then we would use the API to talk outside of it. Only in the last, 2 years or so, people have really started having a lot more people coming to Dojo. And that's where that shortfall of our authorization model is really showing its age.
Yeah, but as you said, you're kind of doing a new authorization model, and then
right. Yeah, that was needed because, like I said, historically we had no idea of it being anything but security people on a team using it, right? And then I've seen, who is it? One of the contributors, I forget who, actually has multiple dojos and is using a dojo instance to divide up amongst product teams, because the licensing model is really friendly for 12 installs. If you want to have 12 installs, right? It's just 12 times 0, so it's pretty affordable.
So true. By the way, we have some mentionings that of people thanking you very much for the presentation. They really enjoyed it. So just to let you know that too. And
awesome.
Back to the questions. There's some guys are asking whether white labeling is possible in Defect Dojo. So can they, for example, brand Defect Dojo with their own company or something like that?
We don't have it as a feature flag or anything that I'm aware of, right, Fred? I can't think of anything to do that.
I don't think so, but it's a BSD license. So
yeah, it's BSD licensed. You could pull down, you could basically do a CentOS thing, right? Like take a copy of our source code, change out the branding from Defect Dojo to your company, and then have a different version of Defect Dojo that way. But we don't have put your logo in this directory and here's a form field for your company name. We don't have any integration at that level.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. Another question that was raised now, people seem to really think about whether how they can use it in their company. So one of the questions is, what is the support program, or is there a support program for Defect Dojo? So how do they get help and support when they need something?
Sure. Well, like a lot of open source projects, it starts with, you can put in a GitHub issue, obviously. We have 2 different Slack channels. We have a Defect Dojo, just normal channel, as well as a Defect Dojo-dev for development question channel in OWASP Slack. I know of one company that does commercial support for Defect Dojo. If you do want to buy that, the company's 10 Security. If you Google it, you can find it. It's 10 Security. I don't know of anyone else that's offered commercial support. A couple times, I think maybe 3 times over the past, a company had approached one of the maintainers, like I know this happened to Greg one time, where a company said, hey, we really want it to do X. We have budget. Can you make it happen? And it wasn't a formal I mean, it was as formal as it had to be, but there isn't a formal mechanism to making that happen, right? The companies say, I really wanted to support, I don't know, what's another? I'm trying to think of a not Jira bug tracker anymore, right? But like, I want to support GitHub issues with bidirectional integration, right? And they want to pay for it. There's not a means to do that, and that's what Greg's been working on, so that a company could come in and say, here's X dollars, right? Please make this feature. It would be transparent that company X gave us so much money and we did the work, and here's where the PR where it got merged and all that stuff, but that's just not in place yet. But if you want help, like you're running a dojo and you're worried about it crashing, or doing upgrades or those kind of things, 10 Security does handle that kind of work. But that's the only company I know of that does that.
Mm-hmm.
Did I miss anything, Fred, or am I good?
No, this was good.
Okay.
So, and you showed us very nice setups in also in Docker and so on. And one question we have here from Fedor is, what's the actually recommended deployment model from your point of view for continuous scan jobs for larger enterprises? So servers, databases, resources, is it centralized, decentralized? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, at any point, I would just separate the database all the time. And then it basically comes down to how many processes and threads you have on your UWSGI setup, and that's it. I mean, the rest, you can scale workers, salary workers. This is what handles the notification, the duplication, and all the background job that we can have, but mostly those two, I guess, notifications and dedupe. And the rest is basically, there's an Nginx reverse proxy, which could be itself fronted with another reverse proxy, and then down to UWSGI, but this is just a web thing, right? So you would scale it the same way as you would scale any type of web application, basically.
Yeah, and for Fred is really, I would look at Fred's slide for the larger installs. He probably is winning that category, at least publicly winning that category. The other times that I've seen people have trouble with Dojo in terms of resource constraints, it's just like Fred was saying, it's usually increasing a thing, right? It could be RAM. If you're eating up all your RAM because of the workers, it might be spawning off more workers. Maybe you initially only have 5 salary workers and you move that to 8, right? Those kind of things can happen. It's certainly easier to be dynamic with resources in Kubernetes. But it also kind of depends on a company dynamic. I had a friend who was asking me about installing Dojo, and they were like, we really want to do Kubernetes. I'm like, oh, cool. How much Kubernetes do you have? We have none. I was like, oh, dear God. Like, don't learn on Dojo. Like, particularly if you want it to be production ready, right? Maybe you want to start with the Docker thing small while your team's getting up to speed on Kubernetes, because the Docker Compose thing is of the installs, it's the most simple one, I would say, by far, because you don't have to think about auto-scaling and pods and namespaces and all the hoo-ha you have to think about for Kubernetes. It's just a VM that's kind of beefy and ideally has an external database. I think external database is crucial if you want to do anything at scale.
And for replication too, because your Docker Compose will not be HA, but you could lose it. But if your database is replicated in HA, you have not lost your data if you lost your container or persistent volume. So that's key for any type of serious deployment, let's say.
Yep.
Maybe to add here another question or thought in that direction. If you would consider taking Defect Dojo to a rather large enterprise, because you think that's the one thing we need, or you evaluate it and you come up with that decision. And as far as I understood, the two of you did it at least once, right? What would you do different there? What would you definitely not do again?
Interesting. So I have a couple horror stories, but they're mostly due to the age of my time with Dojo more than Dojo today. But in earlier, like at Pearson we had it at Rackspace, but we were a cloud company, so resources, you'd like tripped over servers on your way into the office, right? It was like getting resources wasn't hard at Rackspace. At Pearson, we were experimenting with Defect Dojo initially, right? And we weren't even sure we would get approval for resources. So we asked for rather modest resources. And then we suddenly were very successful with Dojo, and it grew like crazy, and it started to show signs of being resource constrained. And unfortunately, getting resources at Pearson was pretty darn broken. So we had to have this like hobbled, slow, painful Dojo for 3 months while they got us a new VM, which, coming from Rackspace where a new VM was like a minute, kind of blew my mind. But that's just what it took politically to get stuff done at work. So I would say one of the things that can trip you up is undersizing, because I've found that when I've done this at, let's see, 1, 2, 3. I'm at my 6th company that I've done this at, that I think, if I'm remembering all of them correctly. And the thing that bit me the most was undersizing it. And the other thing that's been interesting at some of the larger enterprises, the 2 databases that are supported by Defect Dojo are MySQL and Postgres. I don't find those to be really weird, crazy things, but I have had some companies kind of lose their mind a little bit about, wait, this isn't Oracle or MS SQL, and OMG, how do we manage this? Our DBAs don't know about this weird Postgres thing. Luckily, with the migrations of Django, all you really have to do to set up Defect Dojo the first time is create an empty database and a user that can do modifications of that empty database, and then the migrations do the rest. So the DBA workload is very low, but I have had some political fights in the like, that's not one of our officially supported databases, you know, what do we do? And you just had to wrangle people to make that happen.
Yeah, I was thinking more, I was not thinking so much about operations, but I do it Kubernetes again, to be honest. We did spend a fair amount of time to have the GK thing working fine, but now it's running perfect. And to be honest, it's just a pleasure to take dev, deploy, production, rolling upgrades. I mean, it's all happening super easily now. So I would do that again. What I would do differently, probably rolling Defect Dojo out is spend more time ahead, you know, with the product development team and explain how it works and make sure that they understand the dynamics of it and yeah, training basically in one word. You know, if I had to put it, you know, don't expect the developers that are not necessarily security oriented or do not have the time, do not care. I mean, you know how it is. It could be many things, and really take that time up front so that the adoption is actually better. And hopefully the future, yeah, it's going to be even easier because it's going to be sexier. But most of the feedback I had when people were looking at Defect Dojo was like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to click. Where are the things, you know? And yeah, I mean, somehow it's a bit normal, and you can't just expect people to always know, and you need to take that time. So as many things, I would say training is key, awareness is key. So
will you still grant them access to Defect Dojo from the beginning, or would you rather go with put it into Jira first?
Yeah, so with the current model, I would probably hold off and have only security teams do it and leverage Jira as much as possible and stay as close to the developer as close as possible. Now with the new authorization model coming in and proper RBAC being implemented, I think this is something that can be reviewed, especially if we have a UI that's going to be more of a new age UI, because then, you know, everything's possible.
Yeah, I would agree with Fred totally on that. And it's funny because I have my long time with Dojo biases, right? Because I still think of Dojo as a security tool. And when I've done integrations with any stakeholder, be it developers or, you know, the CISO wants, you know, particular numbers on findings, I did all of that through the API, or I did, like in one place, I pushed results into Splunk and then they did it in Splunk, or I've done it to Tableau, but I've kind of kept Dojo isolated to the security team, and I don't know that there's really a reason why, except for historically, that's just how I think. But I the other thing that I think is important about the API, regardless of if you're allowing developers or not to log in or what have you, is that for me, and this is an interesting thing when you have an open source project that's kind of universal, right? Fred may have a very particular way that his boss wants to see results, and he might want to have a dashboard that looks like that. But I may have a different boss with a different need of the dashboard, and there's this natural contention between the different ways to view this data. So I've always kind of wanted to keep Dojo as generic as possible, and then if you need something really special for your company, that's where you talk to the API and you do your thing, because it's at the end of the day, like we've had over the years, a lot of people trying to do particular metrics and dashboarding, and I think it's better suited to push that to something like Tableau or any kind of business intelligence tool, right, that already has all that build a graph stuff built in, because I'd rather code to make Dojo more awesome for security than do pretty graphs, because the pretty graphs problem is solved by other products.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks a lot. I think I'll have maybe a last one for the moment, except if something still drops in. You actually showed us a very nice example where you created this Jira entry and then set it to done, and it was written like migrated. So the question is now, well, and what happens if the problem is mitigated, yet there was never a Jira, or the Jira is still open or so? What happens now on the UI part of the story?
So if things change or happen to change, so first, if you were to put the Jira issue back to in progress, a webhook would still be sent, and the issue in Defect Dojo would be marked or unmarked as mitigated, so reopened effectively. So this works also this way. And the reconciliation job that probably anyone should have scheduled. I think by default it's not scheduled, so you'd have to modify settings.p to have it done. The example is in there, but it's commented out. Depending on what you want to be as your source of truth, it would be code up whenever you have your task scheduled to run to readjust the statuses.
Yeah, and to add on to what Fred said, I've had situations where, because the source of truth question is really the crucial part. I've had situations at companies where they had an entire vulnerability management team that their job was to just take findings and get them fixed within an SLA. So in that case, Defect Dojo was a source of truth for what the AppSec team did, but findings weren't really real until we pushed them to the vulnerability management team. And then they handled that aspect of it. So in some regards, I was kind of lucky in that one situation, because once we verified and a human looked at and we thought yes, these findings are truly actionable, we had a method to push them over right to the vulnerability management team, and then we're done. And we just move on and find more vulnerabilities, right? If you're lucky enough to be in that situation, that's a great place to be. But it's really, I think the crucial thing that Fred said was, what's your source of truth, right? If Jira is your source of truth, then you really got to watch Jira, and you want a bidirectional, and there is a bidirectional support with Dojo. If there isn't that bidirectional support, then unfortunately, either a program that you write or a person, right, is going to have to do that, check the boxes, is this one here, this, and do that reconciliation.
And one thing I was discussing with Valentine also is to, if you don't want Defect Dojo to be in the hands of developers, but only Jira, then let's say you create a specific Jira issue type. And by now, I think everybody understood that Jira is our best supported defect tracker. We have GitHub support too in some ways, but it's buggy. So anyway, and we want them to create a security issue. So security issue type, for example, and whenever anyone creates a security issue type in Jira, it would go and send a webhook out to Defect Dojo, which doesn't exist yet, and basically it would take it, create a finding in the right place, or maybe a place where the product security team could triage it and move it manually, for example, and automatically kind of re-push it back to apply whatever template that is defined in Defect Dojo. So it's actually quite a hard thing to do because of the way Defect Dojo is modeled right now with product types, product engagements, tests, and unless you know exactly where that thing needs to land, then there is no guesswork. So we were talking about that. So there's nothing, it's just talks at the moment, but that would effectively enable people to never log into Defect Dojo, but nevertheless always keep track in Defect Dojo as the source of truth. For example, in my case, it's the source of truth for SLAs. My SLA is mapped directly in Defect Dojo. Reminders are being sent from Defect Dojo. I do my KPIs from Defect Dojo in something else, Google Data Studio. And if all security issue type of Jira could flow into Defect Dojo, it's also a good way to maintain that source of truth for all your metrics, for example. So the solution is not easily implemented, but something we're thinking about. So if anybody listening has a need or finds this interesting, please let us know. At least we know we're just not two people thinking about that, but there's other interests.
Yeah, and one other interesting aspect that a lot of people don't kind of grasp initially about Defect Dojo and its data model that I think is actually pretty powerful, although there are some limitations, like Fred was mentioning, is because it's product type, product, engagement, test, finding, and then an individual finding with the finding ID. The interesting thing is when I've integrated with other systems in the past, as long as I have that finding ID, I can start at the top of that and work down, right? If I have just a single integer product or finding ID, I can go to that finding in Dojo and then work my way. Oh, this was part of this test, which was part of this engagement, which is part of this product, which is part of this product type. So it's kind of nice because with the single ID, I can walk all the way back up the tree, which has been very helpful when I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to drop in this other system so that maybe I don't necessarily need to go back to Dojo, but if I want to be able to understand where did this come from, all I really need is a finding ID, and then I can find all those other pieces out, which is really handy when you're doing like other system integration.
Actually, we have something better for a few months now. You don't need to even track that down. You have an extra in the API, right? If you pass, I'm looking at Swagger right now. Of course, Swagger is huge. But I think you have something like, related fields. So if you put true, it's going to get you all the lineup up to the product type, I think. So you don't really need to chain API calls.
Oh, to chain the calls? Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm used to the old school way where I'd make 5 calls. But they're quick. They're little calls, right? Because you have the ID and it's pretty easy, but nice. We're a good combo, Fred, because you have a much more recent view and I still have my old baggage from being around, because that's how it works in my head.
Sounds definitely that you'll have to do way more talks on that together. Worked out particularly well today. And we even don't have any more questions for you right now. So thanks a lot again for being with us and introducing you to this very helpful tool of yours. And we're looking forward, obviously, to your next releases, and that somebody from the community joins also forces with you, which would be very much appreciated, obviously.
Absolutely. And in that regard, because the question was already there, but you kind of answered it already twice, I guess. But the question was from Oleg, like, okay, you're looking for support. If there is one thing that you would wish for, what would that be? Because there is at least one person out here willing to help. So what are you wishing for? Your wishing time starts now.
Oh, boy.
I think, I'm going to be very generic, but if there's a contributor that wants to help, whatever excites that person, right? I mean, forcing someone to do UI, like, no. If UI is your trip, come help us on UI. If documentation is your trip, come help us on doc. So anything will help, really. I mean, of course, we have the big things that we're looking forward that we name. The UI, of course, is one of the big things because it's also very much our, what people see, and that's super important. So, of course, we'd love to have UI help, but documentation help would just be as great because, I'm also a Linux guy, and whenever I look at Arch Linux, every time I look at their documentation, their wiki, I'm like, yeah, those guys rock. Their documentation is absolutely awesome. I wish, Defect Dojo has such an awesome documentation too. So, it's really what people want to do and want to help us with is the most welcome.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. The other interesting thing, or two interesting things that I think we're lacking and is kind of hard to gather, is use cases, right? The way Fred uses Dojo, and I've learned this from talking to him, is different than how I use Dojo. And it's on the Slack channel, you'll see someone say, "Hey, I used XYZ and I don't like how it does this." And I was like, "Oh, really? I love how it does that. Why don't you like it that way?" So just understanding what people's use cases are would really help the project find that nice balance between, solving everybody's problems and being just a universal tool. And the other thing that's also interesting is I like Fred's slides today are fantastic. I love getting numbers about how people have deployed Dojo, because I mean, one of the strengths of Defect Dojo is it's very flexible and you can do things in like 15 different ways. And one of the weaknesses of Defect Dojo is it's very flexible and you can do it in 15 different ways. So I almost dread when people come up to me and go, "Hey, I want to install Dojo. How should I do it?" And it's like, oh boy, we got a conversation coming on. Like, do you know Kubernetes? Do you know Docker? Do you have VMs? How hard is it? Are you in cloud? Are you on prem? It's really awesome that the project can handle those many cases, but it also, there are times in the back of my head I wonder, like, are there people using Dojo for things that none of us kind of core people know or understand? And could we choose to do a PR that would wreck their world and not know that we're wrecking their world because we've never heard of their use case? So this doesn't even have to be even mildly technical, right? This is even just like an example of like, this is what I do with Dojo. I take the findings from here and I put them in there, and then we do reports out of the API, or I do reports from the HTML directly in Dojo or whatever. I don't know what that is. So the one thing that kind of makes me curious that's always been hard to gather is how are people actually using the tool? And we've talked about trying to like slip telemetry in there, but then you get the whole privacy issue is kind of tricky. And I don't really care to spy on how you use Dojo at all. I have more than enough on my plate without wondering how people are using Dojo and like reading feeds or telemetry or having a marketing crew or some junk like that. But I would like to know that our tool is solving problems for people. And it's hard to gauge that.
Agreed.
Perfect. Wishing time is over now, so you could have wished for anything. This is what you decided to go with. Thank you again very much, Matt and Fred. And with that said, thanks to everyone. Thanks for your interest, for your questions, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.